So we're going to go over 3 key benefits to being a ketogenic carnivore athlete. We're going to talk about the growing list of carnivore athletes because there are quite a number of top-tier international athletes that are coming to a ketogenic carnivore diet and showing vast improvements in their performance. And then my own experience, because when my professor said plants are trying to kill you, and that he didn't eat plants, he didn't eat salads, he didn't eat vegetables, he wouldn't let his kids eat vegetables. That stuck with me. And I was an athlete at the time. I was played at the university level and at the premiership level in the US and Canada, and then professionally in England. And I can tell you, there was a massive, massive difference in my performance. So one of the main benefits is you actually tap into a much better, more useful, and much more wealthy store of energy when you're in a ketogenic state. To store glycogen, you have your liver and your muscles, but you can only store about 10,000 kilojoules, which is about 2,400 kilocalories of energy. So it's a decent amount of energy, but that's by no means our main energy store. In fact, it's our fat. And our fat in a 65 kilo athlete with only 6% body fat, so an elite level body fat percentage, in just those 6% body fat has nearly 36,000 kilocalories of energy available to them. So this is why you're seeing people run ultra marathons completely fasted. Alex McDonald is an athlete actually he's just a recreational athlete in Sydney, and he ran 5 marathons in 5 days, completely fasted, didn't eat the entire week, just to prove the point that you didn't actually need to suck down a bunch of carbs, because the energy that you use for your exercise today doesn't come from the food you ate this morning or yesterday. It comes from the meal you had 2 weeks ago, and it's stored in your fat. And then you use that fat, but only when you're ketogenic. If you're not in a ketogenic state, you cannot access your fat stores, because once insulin gets up to a certain point, your fat cells are locked. You cannot get energy out of those fat stores if your insulin is too high. So you want to get that down low, then you tap into this nearly bottomless amount of energy that's available. So for carb athletes, they're going through this period where they bonk. It used to be called hitting the wall. When I was a kid, it was called hitting the wall. And now we have all these gels and these powders and sugary drinks and things like that so that people can keep up their energy and maintain their glucose. But what I was told when I was a kid was that you have to keep pushing, and eventually if you push through, you'll break through the wall and you're gonna need your second wind, and then you can just go forever. And when you're in a ketogenic state, that is your second wind. You're always in your second wind because you're tapped into your fat stores. You're not just running on glycogen, you're not just running on glucose, you're running on ketones, and that's very important. So as a ketogenic athlete, you don't bonk, you don't run out of energy, you don't have to keep sucking down these sugar gels and having these ups and these downs and these highs and these lows. And that's also important too, because we're gonna talk also about longevity as an athlete and as a person. If you are eating a certain way, you're taking in a lot of heavy carbohydrates for your athletic performance, that's gonna have a metabolic toll as well. And a lot of the athletes that Professor Noakes and others have studied, when they have these comparative analysis with ketogenic athletes and carb-fueled athletes, they may have similar performances on game day, but the carb-fueled athletes, some of them were pre-diabetic, they were getting metabolic syndrome. These are elite athletes, and these people are exercising a lot and they're pre-diabetic. So obviously that's not sustainable for an athlete as well. So, well, why are we told this, that carbohydrates are the best fuel for athletes? Well, it's predicated on a few different things, but one of them is this idea that you can only, up to a certain point of percentage of VO2 max, you're burning fat, and then past that, you have to have carbs. So if you want to be an elite athlete where you're really pushing yourself and really extending yourself, then you have to have carbohydrates because you'll only run on carbohydrates. And so this was emphasized in this quote here by Burke and Hawley. It says, nobody is awarded an Olympic gold medal for the most interesting metabolism, which is true. But I would actually refer to that metabolism, the carbohydrate metabolism, as the interesting anomaly, because the vast majority of animals on Earth, including humans in the wild, are in a ketogenic state. That is the natural state of most animals. That's the natural metabolic state of humans when we're in the wild eating our natural diet. We've looked at lions, we've looked at wolves, they're all in ketosis. Even if you look at cows and gorillas, they tend to be in ketosis as well. And that's because they aren't running on carbohydrates. Even though they eat fibrous plants, which are strings of glucose, they don't break those down. No vertebrate animal can break down cellulose. It's the bacteria in their gut that ferment and eat the fiber, and as a byproduct, excrete fatty acids. So short-chain fatty acids, which are 100% saturated, and then those bacteria die off and they're absorbed as protein. So a gorilla's eating leaves and a cow's eating grass, but what they're absorbing is fat and protein, just like a lion, just like a wolf, just like we're supposed to. And so they're all going to be in that ketogenic so-called starvation state, but they're not. That's a normal metabolic state. So I would actually say to Burke and Hawley that their metabolism is the unique, strange metabolism. So this sort of details some of this. So there's some of these studies that showed, and this was mentioned in the previous talk by Dr. Paul Mason, that some of the performance of the ketogenic athletes, while they were still going through fat oxidation, they were running on fat, they didn't actually have the same performance, but that has to do with largely with being fat adapted. And so this study, the Supernovas trial, didn't actually account for that. They only had these people going for 2-3 weeks. And so they weren't fully fat adapted. They weren't being adequately given electrolytes or given a very small amount of electrolytes. And so this was very poor for a number of different reasons. And there are other studies that did have ketogenically adapted athletes that had far, far greater performance. So it's not just about mobilizing the energy, the fat, the ketones. It's about how you use them. And that makes a big difference. So we looked at some other trials. We looked at Volek and Finney did a study called FASTER in 2016. And so that idea of only burning fat up to 60% VO2 max is sort of undone here, because they found that that's only applicable to carbohydrate-fueled athletes. And so it's not the case in ketogenic athletes, especially when they've been fat adapted. And these people were, it said 6 months there, but it's actually 9 months. They were fat adapted for at least 9 months, average of 20 months. And these were elite athletes, ultramarathoners, Ironman competition athletes. And they had been chosen themselves to go on a ketogenic diet, and they'd been on that for a number of years on average. In the low carb group, you can actually see that they had fat oxidation well past, that's a red line there, well past the high carb diet, over 80% VO2 max. There's still the large majority of their energy is coming from fat oxidation. So it's very different. So if you're eating a whole bunch of carbs, your insulin is high and you can't run on fat properly, then sure, you need to keep eating carbs. But if you have gotten away from that, then you actually had a huge advantage. So the keto athletes had a carbohydrate sparing effect. The vast majority of the energy was in fat. And the good thing is as we'll see in this trial, you make glucose, you make glycogen. So even the amount of carbohydrates that you do use, you don't need to take those in exogenously. And in fact, if you do take those in exogenously, then you're going to go down that blue path, and you're actually going to really curtail your energy mobilization. So this was the study that was mentioned in the last talk, which was where they took muscle biopsies. So they took muscle biopsies before, after, and then 3 hours after their exercise tests. And they found that the ketogenic athletes had essentially the same muscle glycogen levels as the carbohydrate athletes. And the carbohydrate athletes, for the 3-hour test, they were taking down sugary gels and different sorts of sugar drinks and things like that, whereas the fat-adapted athletes that had a bit of fat or something like that, they did not take in carbohydrates. And so it was their body replenishing the glycogen, not the carbohydrates that they were eating. Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia, Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass-fed and finished pasture-raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high-fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. This is a study from Professor Tim Noakes down in South Africa, and this was an interesting trial because he took high carb athletes and low carb athletes, he switched them around. So it was a crossover study, it was a randomized crossover study where they looked at the performance of recreational athletes, weekend warriors sort of things, where they tried to push them to the maximum limits, where they tried to do things. That was the trial where they had 5 successive 800-meter runs. And so you're running really, really hard, and you're doing this again and again and again, and they're trying to wear out and get rid of all available glycogen and see what happens. Well, the fact is that the keto athletes did not lose any performance. And then they did adapt them for 6 weeks, so about 42 days. And then they competed with, in the different trials that they had. Then they had a 2-week washout period where they ate whatever they wanted to, and then they switched. And so the carb athletes became the keto athletes and vice versa, and then they keto adapted them for another 42 days, and they found that there was no drop in their performance. So the idea that you have to have carbohydrates or you will hurt your performance is simply not the case. And once you get away from carbohydrates, even before we look at any sort of advantages you have once you're very keto adapted in months and years after you're keto adapted, which I would argue is the case, you are already at a massive, massive, massive benefit as an athlete just because you're tapped into your fat stores. You're tapped into 15 times the amount of energy from your fat stores than you have available in your glycogen for a 65 kilo person at only 6% body fat. And if you have more than that, then you have even more energy available to you. So the low carb group was still burning fat up to 90% VO2 max, and the high carb group was, no surprise, running primarily on carbohydrates. The low carb group had better metabolic flexibility. Again, this is looking at the carbohydrate athletes are taking a lot of carbohydrates. It's actually causing metabolic issues and forcing people into prediabetes. So obviously that is not a sustainable model as an athlete if you want to continue to be an athlete. Professor Noakes also has a theory that the reason that athletes bonk and they run out of energy is not because they're running out of glycogen, but actually their blood sugar dips a bit. And so this is not getting enough blood sugar to the brain. The brain feels the effects of that. That's also very much benefited by being in a state of ketosis because you're much better able to maintain your blood sugar level, but also your brain runs on ketones and primarily runs on ketones for about 2/3 of your brain. It preferentially runs on ketones. So when you have ketones available, and even if you have an abundance of glucose, those parts of your brain will only run on the ketones. It's only when those ketone levels start dropping that you start filling in the gaps with blood sugar. I learned that in biochemistry 23 years ago, and yet we forget this somehow. So let's look at actual performance when you have somebody keto adapted long-term with high-level athletes. So McSweeney in 2018 actually showed in high-performance elite-level athletes that were self-selected into a high-carb group and low-carb group for 12 weeks. So that's a good amount of fat adaptation. You could go longer, but some studies have shown that after about 12 weeks on a ketogenic diet, you have roughly 4 times the number of mitochondria, and they're 4 times as effective. So right there is a massive benefit in energy production. So the athletes in the keto group outperformed the high-carb group. They had 3 different tests, and 2 of them came to statistical significance, 1 did not. However, in the short 6-second sprints, that did come to statistical significance. So they were able to outperform their high carbohydrate compatriots, and they also improved their body composition. They, on average, lost about 6 kilos and the high carb group lost less than a kilo. And so this shows the benefits of that upregulation of these of being keto adapted. So you can make all the ketones. I mean, this is something that we notice when people first go on a ketogenic diet, carnivore or otherwise, is that their ketones can go very, very high. They may even notice their ketones in their urine. That means their body's not using it. If it's just being peed out, right? It's wasted. But over time, then the urine levels of ketones tend to go away, and you can measure this, and your blood levels of ketones tend to go down. Is that because you're making less ketones? No, it's because your body's utilizing them and using them properly. You can measure this with uric acid levels. Uric acid competes for elimination in the kidneys with ketones. And so if you're spilling out more ketones in your urine, that's going to offset the uric acid. And so your serum levels of uric acid can go up slightly, and studies have tracked this, that it can actually go as long as 4 months and still be elevated. So while it's coming down, you still have slightly elevated levels of uric acid for some people. They don't get gout, by the way. And that's another thing people don't realize. There are 5 different causes of gout. Up until the early 2000s, they were all called gout. Now it's called pseudo-gout, and then gout is called the uric acid crystals. You have no idea. They all present exactly the same. They have the exact same symptoms. The only way to tell is by sticking a big needle into this inflamed, nasty, painful joint, which no doctor is going to do unless they want to get sued, and then you send that off to a lab to see what kind of crystals are in there. Sometimes it's uric acid crystals. Other times it's oxalate crystals. That's another cause of pseudo-gout, which is a plant toxin, which we'll get to. Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor at Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys. So another reason why this is good is because it can promote muscle growth and fat loss, which is obviously beneficial to an athlete. I was speaking to someone in the break, as very, very, very timely, so I added it in, and she said that her nutritionist relative or dietitian relative said that, well, carnivore only helps because it eliminates the junk. And I was thinking about that, and I was like, well, yeah, but that's like saying that the only reason you're not poisoned is because you stopped eating poison. And it's like, well, yeah, that's entirely the point. And plants are also junk. That's a problem too. But that is a major that is a major thing. I mean, the things we're putting into our body directly cause harm, and we know this from a junk food perspective, from a high carbohydrate perspective. You know, if you're eating sugar in the form of fruit, you get a very different glucose and insulin spike as you do if you're eating refined sugar of the same grammage. So it affects your body differently, but there are other things in this world that cause harm. It's not just carbohydrates or processed carbohydrates or even seed oils, even though those are very, very harmful things. There are natural ways that plants defend themselves. And some of these can be thought of as anti-nutrients, so they'll block out the absorption of certain nutrients. We saw that example with different foods such as black beans and corn blocked out the zinc absorption in oysters. But there's so many more. There's things like phytic acid, there's oxalates, there's tannins, and lectins. These things can bind and denature the different nutrients, that vitamins and minerals that we're trying to bring in, and stop us from being able to absorb them properly. So that's very important. A thing called protease inhibitors that are very common in things such as wheat and soy, which will block protease, which is our enzyme from our pancreas that breaks down proteins and amino acids and allows us to absorb them properly. And so when you block protease, then we can't break down these proteins, we can't absorb them, and they go out. They're not bioavailable. We won't absorb them. So it doesn't matter about how many grams of protein go in your mouth. It matters how many get in your body. That's very important. It doesn't matter how many milligrams of zinc go in your mouth. It matters about what gets in your body. And it's very important. That's one of the ways that plants defend themselves, is by making themselves less nutritious, by not being bioavailable, like strings of glucose in the form of cellulose. We cannot break those bonds. We cannot access that glucose. And so all those calories that you would see in a fireplace when you burn wood, there's heat escaping that does not translate into energy in your body. And the same thing goes for many other nutrients, not just glucose, but also they make other things less bioavailable and less nutritious as well. And so this is something that can cause quite a lot of malnutrition. And this is the argument, is that it's not just, well, you're eliminating junk food and that's what makes a carnivore diet better. You're also adding in very nutritious things, and you're not nutritionally deficient anymore, because most people are nutritionally deficient. There's a couple good examples of this in veterinary medicine, livestock medicine, where they have things called different diseases, like big head, big tongue, limp neck, crazy cow syndrome. These are all diseases, but they've actually figured out that they come from the animal eating a plant that they're not designed to eat, and they're actually getting poisoned by the toxins in those plants. And that's very important, because then you can say, okay, well, that's what this cow has. We need to get them out of this pasture. We need to get them different forage, all these sorts of things, and maybe give them some medicine to get them through it. The reason that they figured that out for cows, we haven't figured that out for humans yet, is that cows are actually worth something. Humans are inherently worthless, right? So, because we're selling cows, we're using them, and they're a commodity. And so when your cow gets sick or it dies and its babies are dying, people are losing money. And so they need to figure out what the hell is going on. When people get sick, they go to the hospital, they spend money. So that's the incentive. They're actually not looking to keep us well. I'm not saying they're trying to make us sick, but I'm saying they're not incentivized to keep us well anyway, but they are incentivized to keep livestock well. When you're on a ketogenic diet for 3 months or so, you end up having 4 times the number of mitochondria, and they're 4 times as effective, because you go through something called mitophagy as well, and mitogenesis. So you're turning over the old damaged mitochondria, and you're actually regenerating more of them as a result of that. So this is the key this is the key point, because people say, well, just not eating is what you have to do. You're starving yourself, and your body's looking around for resources to try to get some of these resources and use them for energy around your body. Well, the problem with that is that when you start breaking down your mitochondria, they don't just get used by in somewhere else. They get turned into more mitochondria. It's actually an energy-dependent mechanism.